5, 4.
I'm Christy Latona.
And I'm Paul Dixon.
And we'd like to talk with you a little bit about multiplication. Specifically, we'd like to share with you sort of our passion and belief around the fact that all churches of all sizes, shapes, colors, and locations can multiply their impact. We believe that there's this huge possibility for all churches to make the leap from maintenance to gospel movement.
Absolutely. And our understanding is that is the normative church. That's the church that Jesus talked about. He had all of these illustrations and parables that had to do with something starting very small and multiplying. It was an assumption that Christianity would be a movement and not an institution.
Absolutely.
And we over-institutionalize things, and then we try to grow those things very incrementally so that there'll be just enough new people to pay the bills when the old people wear out, and so we're not going to rock the boat. And this church growth thing of the last quarter century has just ended up shrinking us. That's what it has done. Ever since we stopped talking about church growth, we shrunk. Now what's that about?
Because the focus is on the wrong thing.
It's on the wrong thing. It's not about growing this institution. It's about a movement of God.
Absolutely.
That can't be contained by an institution.
No, it's about what the people of God are doing more than about what the churches of God are doing.
So we went looking all over the world and studying movements.
Before we did that, though, we had read all this research that had been downloaded from all different denominational sources, and we started to look at what were dynamics in common, regardless of who was doing the study, what types of churches they were studying. And then we went to test that by looking at real-life multiplication that was happening today.
In the hot spots, both in the United States and Asia and all over.
And once we got clear on sort of what those core drivers were, what those core characteristics were, then we said, well, what questions would we need to ask to discern whether or not a congregation had it? And then what would be the most practical way of delivering the results of that? So a congregation might be mobilized instead of just having a data dump.
Yes, and we were looking with these questions, and specifically, what are the practices? What are the kinds of experiences? What are the perceptions that we were seeing in these multiplying movements that seemed to correlate with what was going on? And then, so those questions are reflecting those, and we're measuring those items in the life of ordinary congregations and discovering that some congregations that are not growing have an amazing readiness to multiply.
But for whatever reason, whether they don't think that they're big enough or they don't think that they're rich enough, they're not doing anything. So they're sitting on those riches. And that's been some of our most exciting discoveries in using this tool with churches, right?
One of my most exciting discoveries was the ones that multiply have no money and they're not very big. Now what's that all about? We keep thinking in the United States that it takes a lot of money and you got to be big in order to have an impact. And these churches that grow to about 60, 80, or 100, and then they multiply, and they're just meeting basically in homes and community centers and bars and cafes, those are the ones that are changing the world. Those are the ones that are sweeping China.
And the Pacific Northwest.
And the Pacific Northwest.
Right here in places that we don't even think of as being hotbeds of Christianity are.
And so we found there were 4 meta drivers that sort of were the themes that you could sort of summarize all of what we discovered, and they were spiritual intensity,
missional alignment, dynamic relationships, and cultural openness.
And cultural openness. And I have nothing left to say on this subject. My board has run out, and I'm just blank.
That's okay. We're going to count down to 5 because Harrison's taught us this.
Yes, and we're going
to. We'll take this all, and I'll figure out.
Land this airplane.
We're landing this airport.
Airplane. Where do we want to go?
So.
We never, because I don't really know where we're trying to go.
I'm going.
Go.
So basically, these 4 drivers, once you get a clarity around what your strength is in those, you can lean into that strength to be able to move back into a place of multiplication that actually is part of our heritage as followers and learners of Jesus Christ. We have inherited that DNA, yet so much of our cultural learning and institutional learning has sort of put us in some boxes that aren't helpful. And so the big joy in bringing the tool and the understanding into the world has been to see places that have been sort of written off by officials, get clear about what they're good at, lean into that, and actually start to multiply.
Indeed, and some of the places that had been such a joy, it wasn't just that they were small, it was just that at the first audit of who they were in light of the Readiness 360, they were clearly not ready. And yet, when they discovered what their strengths were relative to that, they were able to make choices. One church I know that was just going down has had a total turnaround. And it was one of the most challenged places I've ever seen. And I say, if that church can experience that, that's extremely hopeful for the future of faith communities.
Absolutely. And so we encourage you to figure out what you need to do in order to multiply your impact.